In the 2015 general election, the SNP, Scottish National Party, put forward in their manifesto that they would put every measure in place to deliver home rule to Scotland. In 2017, especially considering Brexit, it's looking likely that this will still be a very strong focus. So let's have a quick look at the philosophical implications of independence. Just as a caveat, this is meant to serve as a platform for further discussion and argumentation, not as evidence or proof for either pro or anti-Scottish independence. Now, the idea of a country's independence or trying to attain independence has been around for a very, very long time, even further back than 1776, in which the United States of America declared their own independence over the British Empire. However, if we hone in on that particular situation, we find one name, a philosopher, who stands out as a particular focal point in the history of American independence. The man's name is Thomas Jefferson. Now, to understand Jefferson, we have to understand another philosopher called John Locke. Now, one of the things that John Locke talked a lot about was that every person has a right of preservation. Rework those words from 1689, from Locke's Second Treatise of Government, to Jefferson's contribution to the United States Declaration of Independence, and you can see where the now famous phrase, "all men are created equal," that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was the British Empire's inability to grant the American citizens these rights that afforded Thomas Jefferson and his contemporaries the moral obligation to stand against the British Empire and say, we are now going to be independent from you so that we ensure that the citizens of the US will actually be able to receive these rights as is afforded to them. One of the things that Thomas Jefferson's call for independence assumes, and a question that we need to then ask ourselves when we engage with this idea of independence, are all people created equal? And does this equality afford them unalienable rights, i.e. rights that they can't be alienated from or they can't be separated from? Are there certain conditions by which these rights should be removed from an individual? On August 15th, 1947, India and Pakistan were declared independent from the British Empire. Dating all the way back to 1721, there was at the very least a British influence over the Indian Peninsula, which prior to British invasions wasn't actually even its own nation, but rather a collection of kingdoms and tribes. And the division of India and Pakistan was an often bloody segmentation of the area. So this raises another really, really important question if we're talking about independence, such as who are we, those who are calling for independence, and who are they, those who are ruling over us? And are those sort of divisions between people helpful or destructive? There are three terms that are going to help us maneuver through those sets of questions: Ubuntu, othering, and belonging. Now, Ubuntuism was popularized in the 1950s by Jordan Kushngabane. Apologies if I pronounce that completely wrong. And then particularly during the post-apartheid years in South Africa. It's an ideology about the universal connectedness of all humanity, that we are all fundamentally invested in each other's successes and each other's failures. And in regards to independence, ask the very important question of how can we actually ever be truly independent if we can never be independent of our own humanity? Now, another key concept is othering. It's a concept in which a collective or individual, us or I, identify others as different from us, and therefore we can rationalize that they are in some way or another inferior to us, and was expanded upon by the phenomenologist, I hope I pronounced that correctly as well, Edmund Husserl. And it's something that is important that we ask ourselves when we are discussing something like independence. Are we operating from a place of othering? Are we fundamentally convinced that those who want to be independent from are less than us? Are we actually putting ourselves in a position of superiority over somebody else based on the fact that we just fundamentally believe that the other is less than us? Now, the third term is belonging, and by belonging we mean belonging to a specific group at the expense of another. So as an example, I am European, therefore I am not an American. Now, according to Martin Heidegger, the idea of Befindlichkeit, or finding yourself, requires you to have an innate sense of connection and belonging to other people around you. So to have a healthy sense of yourself, you need to have a healthy sense of who you belong to as well. Find your people and you find yourself. So if we remove different ideas of culture, if we remove borders, if we remove different nations, then we may be in danger of losing this very real sense of ourselves and our own individuality. In the case of 1776 in the US, when they declared independence, there was a large proportion of people who felt a sense of belonging to America at the expense of feeling like they belonged to the British Empire. So connecting these ideas of belonging and independence puts forward the question as to whether a person wants independence for a country like Scotland because they feel like they have a sense of belonging to Scotland, but that sense of belonging can't be properly expressed while it's still part of the United Kingdom. So this raises another question, which is it helpful to tie your sense of belonging to a country or a nation, which in turn begs the question, what is a nation? Is it borders? Is it the shared language? Is it a shared history? There's a big long list of examples of how countries were formed in Europe, for example, that asks the question, what makes up that landmass, that particular plot, that particular type of people as one country? One of those examples is when Otto von Bismarck and the Prussians took over the entirety of the northern German city-states, just north of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and claimed these as a single nation. A very similar story happened in Italy around the same time, whereas just south of that, Austria-Hungary, their country fractured up because they had too many different languages, they had too many different ethnicities, they had too many people who had a shared sense of their own nationality. So now, what used to be the Austro-Hungarian Empire is now lots of different countries ranging from Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro, Austria, Hungary, Czech Republic, and so on. Where do things like ethnicity and religion and language and all of these different components come into when we look at this idea of nationality? Now, these are just some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves when we want to understand one of the Scottish National Party's key values of independence. What do you think?